And this is a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about today in a kind of a more in-depth discussion in just a second or two, is just talking about some of these new storage controls and storage changes that are coming. So I probably won't say too much about this, so just on this slide, because we're just going to segue into that, to talk about that. But I think we're probably all aware now that there's some fairly significant changes coming around how we manage storage, bringing in quotas and such. So those features have rolled out. They should be, you should have them now on your domain. You'll have a storage menu option now in your admin console. And what we're going to do is we're going to just jump over to another deck and share that with you.
Here we go. Yeah, perfect segue. Thanks for that, Charlie. So in this next session, we're just going to start by diving into the Workspace for Education storage policy updates, just to give you a good overview of what's going to happen and kind of better understand these changes coming up. So first of all, let's explore the new storage policy and what that actually looks like. So for education fundamental customers, there's going to be a baseline of 100 terabytes pooled cloud storage, which I think all of us are already aware of. 100 terabytes should be enough for, amazingly, 100 million docs, 8 million presentations, or 400,000 hours of video. We say baseline because obviously for many Google customers, it will actually be more than 100 terabytes. So, for instance, I don't know if we've got anyone here with more than 20,000 monthly active users, but for those that do have that many users, there will be additional 5 gig per user automatically applied. But of course, then we've got many schools who have taken advantage of the teaching and learning upgrade. So for those customers, an additional 100 gigabytes will be added to the shared pool for each license. If you're using Education Plus, an additional 20 gigabytes will be added for a shared pool for each license. And that's including staff and students. And if you're still using the Education Plus Legacy, I know I am, you'll also get an additional 100 gigabytes added to the shared pool for each paid license. So let's have a brief look at the timeline. So these changes were announced way back in February in 2021. So now, obviously, we are in May and oh, sorry, I lost my place then. So yes, enforcement kicks in July 2022. We've already had the tools launched into the admin console, which I'll take you through in a minute. And it should be rolled out to all domains already. That happened back in April.
Did any admins, just while we're talking about that storage and that doc sheets and slides being counted, I don't know if you guys will have noticed, but I certainly noticed on my domain a pretty significant jump in my storage usage when that came into force. So I went from having about 78 terabytes used to jumping up to about 90 when that storage was added in. So it had a pretty significant effect in terms of our use of storage. And I hit that over that 20,000 user limit. So I'm glad to see I'm getting a little bit more storage there.
Oh, that's a big domain you got, Charlie. Yeah, so now we've looked at the timeline. Let's take a look at what actually counts towards the pooled storage. And like Charlie just said, docs, sheets, and slides and forms previously haven't consumed storage, but obviously starting this month, any new items or edited items will count towards that storage. I'm just going to pull this curtain across now because the sun's shining right in my face, making it a bit hard to see my screen. So obviously also videos have always counted towards storage, photos, Gmail messages, PDFs, and of course content shared in drives not just the user's content, all count towards the pooled storage. So one of the big questions has been what happens when the limits are exceeded. So the behavior is very similar to whether it's an individual user exceeding their limit or their admin limit set for them, or the whole domain if the organization exceeds the global limit. So firstly, nothing changes unless a user or domain exceeds a limit by 25% or for 14 days. So whichever comes first. So essentially, there's a 14-day grace period where the user will get a warning, get a heads up that they're using too much storage, and then have a chance to remove any large files, trash those, or migrate them to some other storage. So what happens really is the main theme is that users can't add more storage. So users won't be able to upload new files or images. They can't back up any new photos, record new meetings, or create and edit or copy and submit files across the editors. So that's forms, drawings, or Jamboard. And it's worth noting that if you don't remediate this, users will still be able to send and receive emails. So emails won't be cut off, so that's good news. Users can still sign in and access their Google Workspace account. So learning can still happen. People can still access that content. Obviously, Google know how critical these services are. So ensuring that everyone can still access kind of mission critical stuff like Gmail will obviously, still will work. So now we're going to actually have a look at the storage management tools. I'm sure some of you may have already seen this in your admin console. So firstly, you've got some new tools for analyzing users. So the accounts users report could be used previously to see Drive, Gmail, and photo usage. But now we've got a new report which allows you to directly see the storage management tooling, admins and the storage usage by each user, and allow us to sort the storage by users for most storage used, which will be really useful. And that also lets you see the quotas. You can also see create exception groups to exempt users from storage limits, apply a storage limit to staff, faculty, and students. And actually, on the next slide, we've got a good kind of description of how storage will work in a typical kind of organization structure. So you can apply storage quotas in several different ways to help manage your storage. So firstly, you can apply it at the very top level of your organization. And that's good to have that kind of default global rule there to ensure that everyone has like a base quota applied to them. Then what you can do is, let's say I want to give our staff OU a 20 gig limit and increase that for those users. And then we could set students to 5 gig, for instance. But of course, that might apply to most users, and most users that could be enough. But for exceptions, the best way of managing that is through groups. So what you can do here is have some created groups with a storage policy already applied to those groups. And if there are exceptions, so if you have a member of staff who is teaching media and you've got lots of videos, then you can drop them into one of the other storage policy groups, and they get a different policy other than what's already applied to their OU. And it's also worth remembering, you can also put groups in other groups and have nested groups. So if you have a photography course of students and they all need more space, then you can put that whole course group in a 50 gig group and they all get a big increase there. So let's switch over now to the Google Admin Console, which I thought I already had up here, but I don't. So let me just load it up. So I've just set up some storage limits on one of my test domains. so we can see how these limits get applied and show you a couple of cool kind of reporting tips which we can use to help identify where storage is being used. Right, so let's switch over to this tab. So you may have already noticed in your admin console, you now have a new storage button down here on the left. So this shows your overall limit, or overall usage, I should say, for your entire domain and how that's split up between Drive, Gmail, and Photos. Also on here, I've got a tab for managing storage settings, which we'll go to in a minute. I can see here my biggest storage users, so I can quickly identify who's using the majority of storage, who are my top 5 users. And also really usefully now, I can see our biggest shared drives. So if you remember previously, it was quite hard to see how much shared drives we're using. The tab you could go into to look at shared drive usage would show you the usage, but you couldn't sort by usage, for instance. You can now do that using this tool. So let's have a look at users first, and then we'll have a look at shared drives in a bit more detail. So first of all, let's just click on a user. There's some differences here. So by clicking on a user, I can see I've already got a 5 GB limit applied to this student. And I can see they're almost at the limit. They're using 97% of their storage. And I can see that most of that storage is in Google Drive. They're not really using much or any photos or Gmail. So then I could add that user into one of the groups I created earlier to give them more space, or they get a notification automatically from Google once they hit that limit about tidying up their storage. So we've got a couple of options there. If I click on view all users and scroll across a bit, okay, so unfortunately this column's not filled in yet, but this would normally show a little bar showing the amount of the quota they've used or not, but it takes a little while to update and it's not updated on this domain yet. But from here I can see all my users and how much storage they're using. And a really useful tip I learned from Ollie at Google yesterday is if you download all these users and make sure you download all columns, so all 35 columns to get all that data. Then if you drop that into a Google Sheet, and let's just switch to this tab, one really useful tip is you can use a pivot table in Sheets to easily break down how much storage you're using between different OUs on your domain. So I can see here at a glance, of course, my staff are using up quite a lot of storage, using 25 terabytes, but I'm also got, hey, there's a lot of storage in X users, so perhaps I need to tidy up my X users container and retire off some of that data, either delete it if they've been gone a while, or archive it off onto some other storage, such as on GCP or AWS or another cloud service, and archive that off. So yeah, I thought that's quite a useful tip to share. And of course, I can see my global usage there. Let's switch back to my admin console and take a look at shared drives now. Yeah, because before with shared drives, it would show you the storage limit, but you couldn't actually sort it by storage used. So that's really useful now for identifying those big shared drives. And I can see at the top here, there's a movies shared drive. So that might be something I want to investigate. Maybe some students just set up a shared drive containing some films. If I allow students to create shared drives, I highly recommend you don't allow students to create shared drives. I think it's a good idea just to make that staff only, to make it easier to manage, as that can quickly get out of hand. And one of the new features, which I think is still rolling out to domains, is it's now possible to put shared drives into different organizational units. So the reason behind this is then I can move, let's say, the photography shared drive into a different OU with a different quota applied. So this lets you apply quotas to shared drives and have that differentiated based on which OU that shared drive lives in. Because previously shared drives, they kind of just existed in a domain, they didn't really live in any particular OU. So that's going to be really useful when that's still rolling out to domains. I've got it on a couple of domains, but it's not on all of my domains yet. So hopefully you'll see it on yours very soon. And of course, just from here, just a reminder, if you do need to go and investigate a shared drive, you could add yourself as a member of that drive, or you could use the investigation tool to drill down into more detail and do some reports on there. Let's go back to the overall storage tool now, and I just quickly wanted to show you kind of applying, moving one of those users into a group. Actually, no, let's look at managing quotas. So if we go to manage, so from here I can see I've set a global quota of 5 gigs, which gets applied to all users across the domain. But I've made an exception to our staff users and applied a 20 gig limit. Might be good enough for some staff, but I know I've got quite a few staff who are already going to be over that, creating lots of screencastifys, lots of recorded Google Meets. So for those users, what I can do is I've already set up some storage policy groups here. And these limits override the limit applied in the OU. So if I assign a user to that group, that limit gets overridden with the group quota. And as I said earlier, you can apply that to a single user into that group, or you can add another group into that group. So I could add the media course into that group automatically. So I know they're going to be really big users of storage.